The toast burned just enough that the smell curled up through the kitchen and reached me before my phone did. I had been half listening to the news and half listening to the silence that had settled into our apartment since he left. Then the phone buzzed, and a little square of light showed a name I still followed out of habit. I looked at the screen and felt a small, precise shock, not because of anything dramatic, but because for a second, I realized how much of my life still lived in the same little glowing rectangle. He was celebrating that a musician he liked had liked his post, and he was actually proud of it. The thought slid between my ribs. Even after everything, he wanted attention from strangers more than he wanted to fix the things he'd broken here. I had been 30 when we moved into our first apartment together. It was one of those rental places with a crooked floorboard by the sink and a heater that clanked at 3 in the morning. There was paint on my jeans the first weekend. He made coffee and put records on like it was a movie. He had a way of making small things seem like we were staking out a life. A chipped mug from a flea market, a plant he insisted on reviving. I worked part-time at the school library and did freelance editing. Money was always cautious, but we managed. He worked longer hours and explained budgets in a way that sounded like stewardship. The bills were in both our names, though he liked to handle the accounts so I can keep an eye on things. There were good mornings, quiet as dew on a window, and there were afternoons when his temper translated into a clipped sentence that left me rearranging the way I moved through the apartment. He was smart, and sometimes his intelligence folded into impatience. He believed in being right more than being kind. He joked that I worried too much about the details, the receipt he left in the pocket of my coat, the overdue notice tucked under a pile of catalogs. But when I looked at our bank statements, the numbers didn't always match the stories he told. I learned the choreography of low-voiced arguments, how to subtract one angry phrase from the next to keep the peace. We kept our private life on a low burn. Dinner at the table, a show on the couch, the habit of making small lists together on scrap paper, dog food, milk, batteries. He said he loved that I kept the paper list stuck to the fridge. He liked to tell people I had a steady job, that I was sensible. I liked that he said those things about me. It tied me to him in a net of everyday details, but there were cracks. He had borrowed money just until next week more than once. A pair of concert tickets became an argument about priorities. You never let me treat myself, he said, as if I had asked him to. There were times I found receipts for dinners he'd had with clients that landed on days when he said he'd been late at work. When I asked, the answers were either a deflection or a sigh that made me feel ridiculous for pressing. I began to track small things with an accountant's patience, a grocery receipt that didn't include the energy drink he loved, a gas receipt for a weekend trip I hadn't been invited to. I was not naive. I just preferred the stories we told each other, the implied contract that people could be better if they tried. The moral fault line, his sense of entitlement that wanted attention without investment, was creeping in quietly. When you live with someone day after day, you learn to measure their willingness by the size of their small kindnesses. He was stingy with those, lavish with his need for admiration elsewhere. That imbalance would prove harder to forgive than a single betrayal. It settled into the rooms like dust.
For months after he left, our lives shuffled into new grooves. I learned to manage the bills alone, to call the utility company and request adjusted plans, to fold laundry after the kids were asleep, the hum of the dryer keeping me company. There were quiet victories the first time I balanced an account and found an extra few dollars left over. the night I paid the rent without asking anyone for help. There were private costs too. The tiredness that nestles into your jaw, the habit of reading texts that weren't there, the way I watched my phone light up and hoped for a message that would never come. He would post occasionally, the social media updates that feel like someone sweeping a room when they don't want to deal with the dust. He shared photos from friends' birthdays, the occasional gym selfie, a picture of a beer he liked, and every now and then he would post about a show he'd been to. I tried not to look, but social media is its own net. You see the highlight reels, the carefully curated slices of other people's lives, and you compare them to your unedited one. We still followed each other because it felt simpler than the dramatic act of unfollowing. It felt like leaving a door unlocked for closure. One night, he messaged me asking for a favor. Could I pick up a box he left at our old place? I'm helping Mark with something and I'll swing by on Sunday, he wrote. The request was practical and banal. I did it because there were still things he had left where we had lived together, and because it would be easier to return them than to let them hang over me like unpaid items. I drove across town, held the cardboard box that smelled faintly of him, and thought about all the little things I was carrying on my shoulders that he had once carried or pretended to. Meanwhile, the child support arrangement we had was messy and irregular. He would send a lump sum, then nothing, then a promise. I kept a folder with receipts, diaper packs, a yearly immunization bill, a chess set for a school fundraiser. I would open it sometimes and run my fingers over the edges of the paper, imagining that someday I'd be able to close it more firmly. Our daughter at school sent a note about a field trip, and I had to call a friend to cover the cost. I'll pay you back, he said later in a flurry of texts that evaporated when I asked for details. Social media became an instrument that intensified the pressure. He would post happily about a new pair of shoes he'd bought or a band he'd finally seen. And each time he pinged the world for applause, I felt something small and sharp. He was generous with strangers' likes and comments. He was stingy with apologies. The more he sought validation publicly, the clearer it became that his appetite for admiration was bigger than his appetite for taking responsibility. That realization settled like a weight. And then the singer thing happened. It should have been nothing a fluke in an endless parade of internet interactions. It had landed in me like a stone. I was scrolling in the early morning, making coffee and switching tabs when his post appeared. He had uploaded a short clip from a local gig months ago and written a line about how he'd loved the artist since forever. There was a little blue heart and a comment from him that read, "She liked my clip." He'd taken a screenshot of the notification, a small square showing that the artist had indeed tapped the heart and posted it with a grin. He was ecstatic, like a teenager. He typed out how it made his day. I felt a lurch that I would later understand as the old pattern. He was craving the kind of praise he never let me have publicly. He wanted proof that he mattered to people who were far away and glamorous. He wanted to be seen and applauded without standing in the room to do the work. It was not a dramatic betrayal, not like the flights or the hidden accounts, but it was a reminder. He was still playing for the crowd, even when what he needed to be playing for, most the family, the people who lived with him, was in the same apartment that now smelled of bleach and lemon at my small kitchen sink. I followed that musician on a whim. It was one of those small, reflexive choices that felt like reclaiming a space. I liked some of their music I had in the past. Maybe I wanted to poke gently at the very thing he was proud of, to see if it was as important as he made it. I clicked follow, not thinking much more of it, and went back to stirring the coffee. 2 days later, my phone chimed with a message notification from someone I did not know. It was the direct message, the kind you get when someone you don't follow reaches out, and at the top of the screen was a photo of a smiling person in a blue outfit, wearing a cap, waving. The image was casual, a stadium shot or a backstage snapshot. It felt friendly and distant at once. The message read, "Hey, thanks for the follow. Good to connect." My heart gave a tiny, surprised hop. This was the musician S account. I thought of his post and the screenshot he de-shared. It felt like a small, improbable collision where the worlds that had seemed so separate, mine, his, and this stranger S, brushed against each other. I told myself not to overinterpret. It was a simple exchange, but something in me wanted to prod at the edges of his pride. I took a screenshot of the DM and one of the notification that showed the singer following me back. Then, I unfollowed the account the way you close a window after getting a draft. For a moment, I amused myself with the absurdity of it. I had the screenshots, 2 small rectangles of proof, one of the message that said, "Hey, thanks for the follow," and the other a little badge showing that the musician had followed me. It felt almost comical, like the universe had handed me a slip of paper that said, "Here's your test." I could have done nothing, let it fade into the background of my life. But I was tired in a blunt way of being the person who let things slide for the sake of being polite. So I sent the screenshots to him. My message to him was short and flat. "Do you know this guy? I saw you were following him, and he just randomly followed and messaged me." I dressed it up with none of the drama because I wanted an answer and because I no longer wanted to be the one misunderstanding the small signals. I hit send and watched the 3 gray dots appear and then disappear. There was a pause in the conversation that felt heavier than it should. When he responded, his tone shifted in a way that felt rehearsed. "Oh, wow," he typed, quickly followed by several messages. "I don't know him personally. He liked an old clip of mine, and I was surprised." "Why are you following him?" The question rolled like a pebble in a stream. It seemed designed to turn my inquiry back on me. I answered plainly, "I followed him because you posted about him." He followed back and sent me a message. I unfollowed after that. I said nothing of how his earlier post had made me feel small, or of the months of sporadic support and avoidance. Then, his response came in a different register. Panic. The text became compressed, swift. "Can I talk to him through your messages?" he asked. "Please let me talk to him. I don't want to miss this. I can DM him from your account, or you can let me use yours." The words were quick and sharp. He sounded like someone who had been caught on stage without a script and was begging for a line. That request landed on me like a test from someone who still believed they had authority over my life. "No," I wrote. My reply was quieter than it had been in years. "There's no reason for you to use my messages." He tried again. "Come on, just for a minute. I will only ask him a question." He added a pleading emoji, then deleted it, then typed again. "You know I don't have a lot of chances to talk to people like that." I felt the old pattern, him asking for access, assuming entitlement to parts of me. It was a small cruelty that was actually a kind of theft. The asking to use my space, my voice, my account as if it were an instrument he owned. The realization that his request was less about the musician and more about him needing to feel like he belonged somewhere took the breath out of me. I was tired of being a door he could walk through at whim. There was also a strange power in the moment. I had the screenshots, the DM, the evidence that a stranger had contacted me. I could have given him the contact if I had wanted to be petty, or if I had wanted to reopen a conversation I'd closed. Instead, I felt a clarity I'd been waiting for. To refuse was to hold a boundary. I typed back, steady. I won't let you use my messages. I am not comfortable with that. He replied with an expletive and asked, with an intensity that sounded almost desperate, why not? My answer was simple. Because this isn't your space to use. And because I am done watching you take what you want because you feel entitled to it. The words surprised even me. They were not loud, they were not performative. They were a statement of limits, the polite armor I had learned to wear. When I hit send, I felt something like air re-enter my lungs. After I blocked him, I sat at the kitchen table and looked at the screenshots stored in my phone. They felt like paper currency, and I treated them with the same careful, sober respect. I had already done the administrative work months earlier, changing passwords, rerouting bills, updating the contact information on the emergency forms. But there are always small, human things to smooth out. The way the kids call for someone at night and you realize who has filled that role. The way friends ask how you are doing and you have to decide how honest to be. My counter move was not public. I did not post the whole thing, did not write a status, did not weaponize the screenshots. There was a temptation there. The kind of small catharsis that comes from sharing private proofs in public forums. But I had witnessed the damage of airing grievances before. Revenge looks neat on a screen, but it doesn't pay the rent or fix bedtime routines. So I put the proofs in a private folder, and I drafted messages to the people who needed to know. The school administrator who asked about emergency contacts, the landlord who needed a new phone number for repairs, the aunt who helped with pickups on Thursdays. I was systematic. I wrote a concise email to the person handling our financial arrangements to confirm that certain payments were to be redirected. I printed a couple of documents and put them in a labeled envelope. I also called a close friend, someone who had a soft voice and a clear head. I blocked him, I said, and the relief in my voice startled me. He asked if he could use my DM to talk to a musician he thinks knows him. My friend laughed softly, incredulous. Good for you, she said. That boundary is a big deal. We made a plan. She would be a point person in case he tried to escalate, to answer calls and help with the logistics if I needed someone to be the buffer. We cleared it with the children as other parent to ensure he wouldn't try to use them as a backdoor, and that the kids wouldn't be put in the middle of an argument they didn't understand. The dignity of my plan was in its ordinariness. I paid a few bills in person so there would be no chance of mixing accounts. I switched the locks on the file cabinet that held our old receipts and tossed a few papers that were just clutter. I started writing a spreadsheet calm, organized, unafraid of its own neatness, tracking who I needed to inform, when, and why. It felt practical and quiet, like sweeping a room. I made a list of people who could pick up the kids if needed and emailed it to the school office. I set up a standing time with my therapist to check in about the after effects. Emotionally, I chose to be present where it mattered. There were nights when the lure of re-engagement pressed at me, when I imagined sending him a message that would unspool everything we'd never said. But those impulses are the old, hungry scripts. I fed myself instead with small acts of care. Making soup that lasted for days, reading an extra chapter with my daughter before bed, meeting a neighbor for coffee and admitting in fragments what had happened. Saying it out loud in a safe space made the episodes less monstrous and more real. There was also a private ritual I kept to myself. Each month, I found a small way to invest in my future that had nothing to do with him. Sometimes it was as small as ordering new pens I liked, in a color that felt like possibility. Other times, it was as thoughtful as transferring a modest amount to a savings account labeled projects. It was not much, but the incremental nature of it felt like building a house brick by brick. It reminded me that dignity is often quiet and accumulative. The climax of this episode was not a shouting match. It did not require lawyers or grand gestures. It is tempting, in the middle of an emotional story, to imagine a dramatic showdown where everything is laid out for the world to see. My reality was smaller, and in that smallness, it felt more meaningful. He messaged me a final time after asking for access to my messages. The tone had shifted from entitlement to something tighter, a kind of pleading that pulsed under the surface of the text. Please, I won't abuse it. I just need to ask him a question. I just want to see if he remembers me. I could have written back at length, pointing out the facts, the debts, the lateness of payments, the flights, the nights he'd been absent when the kids were sick. I could have used the screenshots to shame him, to score some petty victory. That would have been playing his game a public performance. Instead, I wrote simply, "No, I don't want you using my messages. Please stop contacting me about this." I hit send and then I hit block. After that, he called. The first call was brief and frantic. "We need to talk," he said, "just this once." I let it go to voicemail. The second call came through the next day while I was on the school run. He texted my sister and left a message on a mutual friend's phone. It felt like someone trying to pry open a door that had been locked. The friend called me afterward. He says he needs access to your messages to talk to that musician. "Are you sure you blocked him?" she asked. "Yes," I told her. I was calm on the phone because I had prepared for petty escalations with practical steps. We made a plan in case they tried to contact our children. The drama, when reduced, was manageable because I had accumulated supports. That night, he sent a message that was both a dare and a confession. "You don't get to be petty and then act like nothing happened. You walked out," he wrote. "You left me, that S on you." I read the words and felt the old pull to answer, to re-engage. But the more I considered it, the clearer it was that the only consequence I wanted was the quiet one. Me keeping my boundaries. So I deleted the message and let the silence hold. The payoff here was not revenge. It was not a public humiliation. It was a reassertion of agency. I had the screenshots. I had the message threads. I had the memory of his face when I told him no. I had set practical things in order: the bills, the kids, the household calendar. The real victory was quiet. The internal economy of someone who decides to protect their own space. It was satisfying in a domestic way. I had more time in the evenings to read without tensing at my phone, to make a list and cross things off. There was a small, symbolic moment that felt like a seal. A week after the exchange, I was folding laundry, and my daughter came in with a drawing she'd made at school. It was of our little apartment with a garden of flowers. On the paper, she had drawn 2 people and a house and a cat. She hugged me and said, "I like our house." I felt a tug of something like redemption. It was not about proving him wrong. It was about choosing to build a life that did not depend on someone else's approval. Eventually, the frequency of his messages dwindled. The calls stopped, and the occasional social media post he once used like a flare for attention became less resonant to me. I did not gloat publicly. I did not celebrate in a way that required more people to know. I carried on with the quieter wins. The library job offered a small raise, and I used a portion of it to open a modest savings account labeled after. I took my daughter to the park on a Saturday and let her lead the way to the swings. The ordinary rhythms stitched themselves back together with small, patient stitches. I kept the screenshots, but I never used them like a weapon. They were evidence to me, not ammunition for a fight. The power of having them was the knowledge that I had been paying attention to the little things, to the receipts, the messages, the patterns, and that I had acted before the hurt calcified into resentment. It felt like a moral clarity. Dignity is not the same as making someone else suffer. Dignity is the careful tending of your life when someone else has stopped tending theirs. There were moments of doubt. On some evenings, I would catch myself scrolling and wonder if there was a part of me still curious about where he had gone, who he was with, if he had found the admiration he craved. But those curiosities were passing shadows. I had learned to root my identity in more durable things. Friends who called when I needed help, the routines that made our days reliable, the projects that gave me purpose. Revenge would have been loud and messy. Peace was slower and steadier. I had to remind myself that boundaries are not acts of cruelty. They are acts of care. Saying no to him was saying yes to myself and to my child. It meant teaching by example that respect cannot be assumed or demanded. It must be earned through consistent kindness and effort. There was a dignity in that lesson that I could carry into all the relationships I had left. One quiet afternoon, I sat on the small balcony with a cup of tea and looked at the phone, thumb idly skimming through old photos. I found one from the first year we moved in paint on my jeans, a crooked lamp, 2 mugs on the table. It made me smile. I had hindsight for both the foolishness and the tenderness of those days. The story of us was not a simple moral drama. It was messy and human and filled with the kinds of compromises people make when they are trying to love and also trying not to lose themselves. In the end, the thing that shifted was the ledger inside me. I stopped accounting for him in every small decision. When the singer SDM came through, I had a momentary temptation to use it as bargaining. Instead, I chose a quieter route. I unfollowed, took the screenshots, messaged him a simple question, and when he asked to use my messages, I said no. Blocking him was not dramatic. It was a closing of a chapter. The moral I carried forward was not righteous triumph. It was a small, patient truth. Protecting yourself is not mean, it is necessary. Gratitude for the people who stayed, for the steady work of putting one foot in front of the other, replaced the urge to spectacle. When I teach my daughter about relationships, I find myself drawn to telling her about ordinary courage, the kind that lives in setting boundaries, in doing the bills on time, in answering a child's question, even when you are tired. Those are the moments that hold a life together. I had learned that dignity is quieter than revenge and stronger for it. If this emotional story resonated with you, please like and share. Leave a comment with your own real life story or family drama. I read them all and appreciate your honesty. Subscribe for more calm, true to life stories.